it's difficult to have a discussion of diversification without introducing the concept of Dutch disease. And the idea is that there's something in the processes in resource-rich countries that lead to the lack of competitiveness in the non-resource sector. Its most visible signs are an appreciation of the real exchange rate and perhaps inflation in the non-resource sector and a lack of wage competitiveness. The notion behind this is if you can deal with some of these issues, the issues of enabling environment, the issues of macroeconomic stability and so on, you're well on the road to, or these are preconditions to diversification. Norman Gervin and Young Farrell, however, argue that, after no matter how you try to get the enabling environment right, and I'd quote Norman Gervin's statement, as it relates, and I think it was in respect of Trinidad and Tobago, he said, as long as it is easier and less risky to make quick returns from importing, trading, fast foods, restaurants, property, and real estate, these activities will flourish and there will be little success at diversification. Look around to the Trinidad reality. How would you comment on this? Let me repeat the quotation. As long as it is easier and less risky to make quick returns from importing, trading, fast foods, restaurants, property, and real estate, these activities will flourish and we will have little success at diversification. Don't forget how I defined diversification earlier on. It has to do with expansion of non-energy sector activities geared to export. Would you like to comment on the statement?
I think it's important to note, some clear issues you need to place on the table firstly. That the response of let's say, Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname, so looking at the economies that are rich or dependent on oil exports. Since 2008, there has been a shift in their fiscal policy stance towards borrowing to maintain the economy instead of facing the issue of shifting the dynamics and diversifying the economy. Or other experiences with diversification may have been in the mid-2000s, where there was a selection of 7 sectors, with very little dialogue from the private sector and the population to determine whether these are the sectors which are viable in terms of economic diversification. And the private sector at that time essentially coined them the 7 wicked sisters. What we have noticed with respect to Trinidad and indeed other Caribbean economies is a reluctance to accept that a policy framework and a certain level of public investment is needed and dedication towards diversifying away from let's say oil and natural gas. And the diversification process can be diversification within the oil and natural gas sector and other sectors, and then other non-energy sectors. And there's been an unwillingness thus far to treat with these issues in a meaningful way with respect to policy setting. And let me give you other examples. We've seen, and I'm supposed to provide a regional perspective. We have seen other economies, Caribbean economies, forced to diversify from sugar production to the tourism sector. We have seen St. Kitts and Nevis, which has been hitting fiscal surpluses, even excess than Trinidad and Tobago over the last few years, develop their sugar industry diversification fund and form the initiative Citizens by Investment initiatives, using the windfalls from that that initiative to pay down debt, probably provide some make-work programs to boost, to lower unemployment levels, but still seeming to invest in diversification to the extent that St. Kitts and Nevis now has an enclave-type sector doing electronics, electrical components.
Okay.
And the current policy framework.
Okay.
We're looking at another example with respect to St. Kitts and Nevis again and Antigua and Barbuda. There was a manufacturing development strategy which probably is very cumbersome and wasn't implemented, speaking to Hayden's implementation deficit. What they did is ask ECLAC to look at that strategy and determine what are some of the sectors they can target and the policy measures necessary. And that work has been done, taken to Parliament, and now being implemented. So we're seeing here generally a reluctance to accept the need to diversify and an unwillingness to engage with the public and private sector to determine what are these sectors.
Okay. Let me see what do you say, Hayden?
We're missing an important point here. To what extent have we put in place the structure, for instance, to commercialize research done at our various research institutions? We have the University of West Indies, we have Kariri, we have COTE, and so on. To what extent have we invested sufficiently, not just in getting the research done, but in finding the markets, creating the platform for that commercialization process to occur? The GPAN, heard about it? Nobody heard about the GPAN?
Unfortunately.
There ought to be a factory making the GPAN, exporting the GPAN. Yeah? By now, right? I can't hear you. So what's the problem? What's the problem? Is it that we're waiting on some private sector entity to form a public-private partnership to mobilize the capital to help this to happen? Or is it that we have not really thought through the process of translating our research into commercially viable entities that are predominantly export-oriented?
So let me ask you, what you're saying is, it's an interesting viewpoint. You're saying that the initiative must start with the government
Creating the enabling environment.
creating the enabling environment and providing the wherewithal for the private sector.
Now, hold on. I know when we say the wherewithal for the private sector, I know where that's going to go. The role of the state ought to be threefold in all of this. As a facilitator in some instances, as a regulator in other instances, and as an initiator. In our small open economy scenario, and given the nature of our domestic private sector, there is an important role for the state to play in terms of mobilizing capital as an initiator, as a venture capitalist in that regard. But the problem, again, is the implementation deficit. We've had NEDCO. You all heard about NEDCO? You know Export TT? Well, Export TT used to be BDC, and before it was BDC, it was SBDC. We've had the Development Finance Corporation that evolved into the Development Finance Limited, and then who knows what it is? I think they're just trading in foreign exchange now. I don't know, whatever they're doing. I don't even know who, if the government has any significant role to play in that entity anymore. But the point is, we recognized the need very early in the post-independence era for us to structurally transform the economic platform, and for the need for specialized financing to mobilize capital. We've had the Agricultural Development Bank. In recent times, we had TABA, a TT Agribusiness Association, yeah? And that was supposed to remove some of the business and price risk within the agricultural value chain, which was supposed to stimulate a higher level of agricultural output. What happened to that entity?
Okay. There's the director of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure she would make a point. I'm sure she would make a comment on that. But because what you are saying, in fact, the quotation was sort of meant to imply that the private sector wasn't doing its job. I mean, the real job that's required of, in diversification. Let me go to the other extreme. There's a new theory that sees the diversification problem of really a political problem. And this is led by a guy named Alan Gelb. And he says, large resource rents, large natural resource rents make democracies malfunction. And there's a tendency for these countries to lack accountability and to be dominated by patronage politics. They become hostage to economic policies that are driven by short-term, patronage-driven electoral competition and a non-transparent allocation of resource rents. I guess the argument is that governments may be paying lip service to diversification, but in effect, diversification is a long-term strategy, and there's something about how governments in resource-rich countries operate, and that's characterized by a short-term horizon, not only a short-term horizon, but dominated by patronage politics. Do you think that the difficulty we are having, or that we have had with diversification, comes from the public sector strategy, the government strategy?
I think that in the first instance, there needs to be a recalibration of the approach. Even with respect to the setting of the budget, we have recently gone into member states, 6 Caribbean member states, and introduced or doing some training in public expenditure reviews, where we're instilling the importance of engaging with the public sector and the private sector in your budget setting, ensuring that the allocation of the resources is consistent with the macroeconomic goals or the goals set out in your strategies. So if your strategy identifies economic diversification and identifies from your dialogue with the private sector, key sectors, and I've mentioned some of them, creative industries, ICT, and there are a lot of other sectors, services sector, and elements of manufacturing. If you're seeing that these are the sectors that you want to diversify towards, then we have to move away from the process where the allocation of monies within the budget is essentially happens by a dialogue between a minister, a PSR minister, and the prime minister, who eventually has the ultimate say. And that your approach to asking or budgeting or allocations is that, okay, last year I got X, so this year I'll ask for X plus 20%, and if I'm lucky, I'll get extra 10%. Okay. But the thing is, it's not geared towards optimizing resource allocation across sectors in order to facilitate the increasing competitiveness and diversification in economies. And I think that is the first step.
Okay, let's, I saw Joel looking just now that we are, we are outlasting our welcome.
Oh, welcome.
So let me give you 1 minute to react to that, and then I would open up the discussion to the audience.
Okay.
For 10 minutes. I think we can take 3 or 4 questions.
All right, great.
Do you agree with the statement?
No. Patronage politics will exist wherever there are weak democratic institutions. Doesn't matter whether you're a natural resource-rich country like Trinidad and Tobago, or whether you're a large and well-established democracy like the United States of America. Patronage politics is about democracy falling into the wrong hands. It is about democracy failing. It is about democratic institutions that are not holding together the rules of the game. And the rules of the game become corrupted and one-sided. And the challenge there, apart from the misallocation of resources that results, the challenge is the loss of confidence in the economy and in the society. Patronage politics, weak democratic institutions. The checks and balances, hold on, the checks and balances in Trinidad and Tobago, the checks and balances, Auditor General's office, DPP's office, Integrity Commission. How well do they function in the context of the work that is demanded of them? How well resourced are they? And to what extent does that deficiency cause you to lose confidence in how your democracy works? The judiciary, the length of time it takes for cases to go through the court. All of these institutions constitute the platform that builds the confidence of the people in its democracy, in their democracy. So patronage politics will exist wherever there are weak democratic institutions. And once it exists to that extent, it distorts the allocation of resources, and by virtue of that, it creates even more negative undercurrents in the society. Feelings of abandonment, etc., etc.
I agree with you, but I guess the question is, don't you think that there's something inherent in an economy that that has, from time to time, enormous rents concentrated in government's hands, particularly in a small economy? Don't you think that they're in a better position to exploit patronage politics?
They probably are, because of the ready availability of surplus
lots
funds.
of money, yeah,
right?
okay.
They probably are. But I'm saying to you that with weak democratic institutions, that will happen anywhere.
Okay. Could I open up to the audience for 10 minutes? If Catherine, as the ex-CEO, you're free to to respond to the question about the private sector, you know, being more prone to commercial activities rather than risky investment. Because in essence, the kinds of investments that are needed for diversification carry tremendous risks.
Morning, everyone. Yes, I do agree with that comment. And it's exactly as you said, Norman Gilbert said. It is a lot easier just to go and import something, maybe add nothing onto it or add 2 cents onto it and then put a markup and sell, right? Why go through all the trouble of trying to get into manufacturing or look for overseas markets? The challenge with the private sector doing that is, I think, a bit of what Hayden is trying to talk about there. The environment for doing business in Trinidad and Tobago is extremely difficult. You cannot rely on institutions to get permits. You can't rely on institutions to get things in place, so the infrastructure is not there to allow for that. Basically, with the import distribution business, I mean, we still have to rely on the government now to get foreign exchange to bring in the products. So that has become a recent issue. But outside of that, it's pretty much in your control after that, right? Going to look for markets outside of Trinidad and Tobago so that they can become, you know, hopefully net earners of foreign exchange is something that, I mean, even as a chamber, we've been talking about and doing missions and trying to get people to look for external markets. Again, it's really what is easiest to do. And I think that point also probably applies even to the government, the point you're making, you know. When they have all the rent from the natural resources and so that we have the rents, and there's no urgency, there's really no need to dig any deeper to find anything else to do because this would allow us to survive. And we know a lot of governments are very short-term in nature, just thinking of the next 5 years. It doesn't have the impetus for them to get up and do what is required to make sure that the policies are in place, the institutions are in place to allow the environment to really improve and for development of a diversified economy. So I personally believe that at times like this, we really have the opportunity to look and see what we can do and make a difference. So yes, it is challenging times, yes, it is difficult times, but what forced the government to decide to touch the subsidy, the fuel subsidy? It is something that, I mean, we as business associations and others have been talking about for a while now. The only way we would drive the habit and change the habit of driving up and down as though, well, really and truly, fuel didn't cost us anything. So we drive up and down as we want. We have an inefficient car, it doesn't matter, it burns more fuel, it doesn't matter because fuel is cheap. But the economic times and the economic situation now has caused the government to look at that and to review GATE, right? There's some of the things in the review I agree with. GATE should, in fact, be means tested. So these things, the economic situation forces that, and out of that we will see some changes, and it will change the behaviors. People will start looking at how much they drive their car up and down, will start looking at CNGs. But on the other side of that, if I want to look at that,
Warning, the following program contains
I have to make sure we have the gas stations to provide that. So again, government comes back into that. Now, gas stations could easily be private sector also, but you need the government to give you a license, approval, etc. So I think the two have to work hand in hand, and the private sector is willing. We just need the institutional framework.
You still have hope?
Still have hope.
You still have hope for
not giving up at all.
Okay, okay. That's a question behind that? Yeah. With this, yeah.
Hello. Okay. I want to agree with what was said this morning by Dr. Farrell and then Heath. We hear these things, and I agree tremendously with Hayden with regard to implementation. Because all that we are saying here, whether it's the previous person who came before me, or what is being said on the on the head table. The question is about implementation. The thing that Dr. Farrell talked about this morning, and I read his articles up to yesterday, the question what he's saying is, listen, we can only advise. And until we stop this thing about, I am put there as an organization, and I can only advise, then it's going to be disaster. I was in a country where we had coordinating committee. So I am working with the committee, and I said, listen, let us do this. Let us put this in place. What about these results? What about these monitoring and evaluation systems? You know what they told me? John, we are only coordinating. We are not implementing. But guess what? 40% of the 15 to 39 age people were dying from HIV. But the coordinating unit saying to me, I am not an implementer, I'm a coordinator, and this is what I'm hearing here in Trinidad and Tobago.
So you're saying
that we are not implementing, we are coordinating, and we have to stop that and let somebody know out there, listen, unless we stop this thing about coordinating, advising, and not implementing, we are going to be worse than Haiti.
Okay, so you're saying the problem is with the implementation of government policy.
About implementation,
okay.
All of us are saying the thing. When we say it, they say, John, you're crazy. Okay. I said, yes, a man was crazy, and they hang him up on a cross and juke him.
Okay. Please.
I would start where he left off with the concept of implementation. In that, I was having a conversation with my lecturer, and I just had a conversation with Dr. Farrell, and we start at implementation, but the problem doesn't start at implementation, it starts at the conceptualization of these programs. Okay? So I'm a student, so my issues are GATE and the laptop program, and I was actually speaking to him about GATE, and he said when we moved from dollar to GATE, there was poor conceptualization. We wanted to achieve, I believe it was an 18% increase in tertiary education turnout. But the way the program was designed, the way the program was conceptualized, there was no structure to implement. It was just free funding. Here, take money, go get an education, right? And that is where the fallout begins.
Okay.
Right? Secondly, I am a student of sociology, with a background in politics and psychology. And what we discuss is politics versus administration. I think because what we're talking about here is a lot of cultural issues that we have in our management, our economics and whatnot. And the problem we have is we have too many politicians and not administrators. And I personally find that that comes when your prime minister is a seismologist and all these different things. And these, not to be offensive, but it is a problem that we have. We don't have administrators. We don't have people whose background is in politics. We have lawyers, we have doctors, these different things. And I think we need the professional public administrators to come into public administration to administrate and manage our affairs. If I could add some example to that point, when we privatize public industries, is very successful. Why? Because of the management culture of the private sector. So if it is we approach our politics from that matter and we bring in the professionals who have the educational background and the mindset to manage our affairs in a particular way, as opposed to those who decided or aspired to be in public office, but may not necessarily, because to be a doctor, you have to study medicine. To be a lawyer, you have to study law. Okay. So why is it our politicians aren't students of politics?
But you know, I really thought you were going to say we have too many politicians and not enough businessmen. I thought that's what we're looking for, no?
No.
Isn't that what we're looking for? I thought that's what we need for diversification, right? Well, okay, let's make the best of the few minutes we have. They're going to put us out, watch it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm from Export TT, so we're an implementation organization. I just wanted to share a bit of the perspective from our where we sit. It really starts at the policy level, because some of the policies that are brought to us to implement, one wonders where it comes from. With regard to
You know where it comes from. You know where it comes
no, I
from.
mean with regard to diversification, and you see these sectors for development, and now we have new sectors: aviation, software design, maritime. Some who were from the past government, some are new. But you know, these sectors are presented, but there doesn't seem to be the plan. I know, it comes down to us in terms of implementing, but when some of the policies, let's take trade agreements, for example.
Right.
The products included in these trade agreements, sometimes they're not aligned to our manufacturing sector and things that we produce.
Good.
But then I am an implementer and I have to go and increase trade between Trinidad and Tobago and a lot of Latin American countries. And it could be difficult. And there are a lot of other factors that will contribute towards that. A trade agreement alone doesn't automatically give you access into a market.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other things we need to look at particularly our competitiveness. And we spoke about comparative advantage and competitive advantage. How competitive are our companies?
Okay.
What is the environment that is needed to make them more competitive, and who's responsible for those things?
To end
So-
now?
Yeah, good point.
You need
Good
to
point.
end now?
No, one more question.
Oh, one more question. Oh, yeah, okay. Wait, okay, this one and this one.
Okay.
That would be two.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So one of the points of discussion was supposed to be whether diversification was going to be possible if it was easier or simpler to just import like fast foods. And I don't remember the other two elements, right? But this is a really good question because when you look at the Caribbean, you realize that a lot of our spending leaves, right? Because we have a lot of foreign fast food restaurants like Subway and KFC and churches that could come in, and we have other things that we import that are much less costly to import due to mass production elsewhere, right? Now the question arises: even if we could implement the policies properly, wouldn't it still be difficult for us to compete with foreign countries? Because a lot of these industries that we're investing in would be things that other countries have already, and we'd now be going in new. So wouldn't the government also need to implement and support these industries until they're able to compete?
Let me ask you, it's a good point you raise, and it covers something that the last speaker said. I think there's a certain consensus on the industries in which we have comparative advantage. I think there is. One is tourism. I think it would be correct to say that we have not maximized the potential of our tourist sector because we had oil and gas. Do you think that we could make, we still have time to build a resilient, competitive tourist sector that could be a driver of diversification?
I think we can, because one of the problems is that in the Caribbean, we don't realize how strategically located we are. Why would Americans leave from America and go to some islands in the Pacific when the Caribbean islands are so much closer, right? And even if we could get them to come here, how do we get our money to stay? Because let's look at Bahamas. Atlantis is one major factor why a lot of tourists flood Bahamas, but I don't think that's Bahamian owned. If it is, somebody please correct me because I'd look like a fool. So it's not Bahamian owned. So many tourists go there, yet still a lot of people on the ground still suffer because it's not for Bahamas. Now, can the Bahamian government not build another resort that could effectively compete with Atlantis and maybe even run it out of business?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Just very, very quickly. I know we're almost out of time. Just let me share just one thought with you. We need to rethink what tourism is. Because tourism can be health tourism. Tourism can be ecotourism. Tourism can be sports tourism. It can be conference tourism. It can be all of those things. And therefore, within the context of an industry, there are many subsectors that can be linked. Tourism can then be linked to agriculture, yeah, and agro-processing. So we probably have to rethink tourism not merely as leisure tourism, as in a sandals tourism, but tourism that is possibly knowledge-based tourism. The University of West Indies could engage in a level of tourism as well, from an educational standpoint. Mount Hope can be a place where people come for specific treatments from all over the world, all over the Caribbean, and so on, right there. So, yes, we have to rethink tourism.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, sir. And you have the last word.
Very quickly, I just want to commend him for his contribution, of course, but until we put a presidential seal, I just want to commend him for what he just said, but until we put a presidential seal on Pomsite wine from Agata Paul in San Fernando and Mountain Dew from Moruga, then the money wouldn't stay here, of course. But quickly, Chair, to your preamble when you spoke about the fast foods and so on. To me, quickly, when you started that, it sounded like rent-seeking. And what is rent-seeking? Rent-seeking is private capital in terms of import, export, fast food, and so on. And if my note here says that if we allow private capital or the private sector this leadership role in diversification, then the import-export merchants and so on, the end of that will see us here at the LRC October 2016 talking about the end of foreign exchange and all of that. And if the public sector took the lead, the question is, does the policy makers and whoever at that level, in my opinion, understand the strategic direction that we must go to, away from the mainstay of the economy, of course, to satisfy a welfare state? The gentleman, I think Mr. McLean, spoke about St. Kitts and Nevis, for example, that they run surpluses, but my memory tells me that St. Kitts and Nevis has something called an Eat Local Day. And the question to me is, well, the question to the general listening audience is that, does our policymakers and administrators understand the importance or the vision of something like that? And you went on to talk about TABA and so on. The CEO is presenting, well, the former CEO is presenting tomorrow. So you may ask him your questions then.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have gone more than half an hour over our time, right?
All right.
Goodness, I'm sorry I wouldn't come back again. I'm sorry. Okay, Joel, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, audience. Thank you very much. Thanks, and thanks to the panelists, Sheldon and Hayden. Yeah, okay, thank you very much.